Hello everyone, it's I, Wacky Anime What If, here to present you with What If Issei had Chucky as a sacred gear. I hope you all enjoy. And before we get on with this, I have a second channel known as Midnight Psycho where I'll be playing games. That's all I really wanted to say, so let's go ahead and go in. Chucky, well, everyone knows it as a good guy doll, but a man known as Charles E. Ray is currently having to inhabit one because of what happened previously. Let's have a little flashback, shall we? Charles Lee Ray has started to run away from the cop that was on his tail. He was found out about all of his murders he's been committing in, well, the town of Ko. So he's having to run with his tail tucked between his legs. And he runs across the street near a toy shop that sells good guy dolls. He notices this couple, this man and female, that are walking near the shop. He sees a child that the mother's carrying. He grabs the child when he's running past, runs into the shop, closes the door, locks it, and just runs towards one of the good guy dolls, knocking it over by accident because he was trying to get his bearings. But he was slipping because the floor had just been cleaned by the janitor before he left. So when he slipped, he accidentally opened a good guy doll box with his hand. And he didn't know, but he was touching the good guy doll. He was waving his other hand across the baby and saying the magical words that would make his soul go into the child, so that he could live as the child and commit as many heinous acts as he desired. And he would get away with it a lot more. And they could swap bodies afterwards and just do this endlessly. But he messed up. At the end of the ritual, he ended up touching the child doll, the actual doll, known as the good guy doll, the entire time, while waving his hand above Issei. And something inside of Issei started glowing. And this little red gauntlet came out onto Issei's hand. And Charles E. Ray was like, what the fuck? And before he could say anything, he fell over and collapsed. And he was transferred into a doll. But before he collapsed, his hand landed on the gear. And he was in the middle of saying the last word. So the doll, once his soul got transferred into the doll, it transferred into the sacred gear, because the dead body was still touching both of those. And the spell was still going. So the good guy doll, which has Charlie Ray's soul inside of it, is being transferred to this sacred gear, or this weird gauntlet, in his opinion, what it looks like. He gets summoned into it, and he is currently very pissed. Later on, the cops find just a baby there and don't find Charles E. Ray at all, except for his corpse in front of it. They don't really find any supernatural phenomenons when devils start to check, and fallen angels. They're the ones that tipped off where Charles E. Ray was. But Chucky didn't know about fallen angels or any of that bullshit. He just cared for killing. He just did it because it was fun. He didn't know that he killed a devil, and that was a high-ranking devil at that. But he caught the high-ranking devil off guard. It's the reason why he didn't get killed. And they came for revenge, and they called across from each faction to get revenge on Charles Lee Ray. And while they're talking about this with the one police officer who's in on the situation, Chucky, who's inside of Issei's body currently, can hear everything that's happening. And he now knows that fallen angels and devils exist. And he's laughing hysterically inside of Issei. And he's thinking, I'm gonna grow this kid up to be the most notorious killer and kill all you fuckers. This'll be my son now. He's thinking of raising it as his own. Once Issei's parents appear and pick up Issei, they notice something's off about him. His aura is kind of different. They don't know why. But he still has the same little smile on his face. The baby still has the same smile on its face. So they just put that in the back of their mind. And as Issei's growing up, he's a very silent boy. He is a very quiet kid. He gets picked on in middle school and elementary school, But when someone picks on him, he goes berserk. He'll smash their head in with chairs. He'll push them across the hallway. He'll slam them against lockers. He'll even grab them by the head, pull out a pencil, and start shanking them. He's been suspended from multiple schools, and his parents are kind of sick of him. He's been doing violent acts whenever someone bullies him or picks on him. But they don't know it's not his own influence. It's Chucky's influence. Chucky is influencing his personality directly by constantly talking to him inside of his head. And Issei has to go to therapy for years because, well, there's a voice inside of your head. When he told this to his parents, they took him to a therapist. The therapist said that he's very psychotic and he's a danger to society. So for a few years, he was put into a mental institution, which there were several deaths in that mental institution, and a few people said that they saw a doll with red hair walk across and start stabbing people. And this kind of matched in with what Issei was saying about a doll when he mentioned the voice and how the person looked in his dreams. So they figured that it was Issei, but they didn't have any proof, so he's under watch. Wherever he goes, he's always under watch by people. And no one really goes near him until he goes to Kohai. Once he goes into Kohai and he steps foot, he hears a voice in his head saying, "I can sense the people who condemned me into this fucking mess that you call your body. And with this stupid red dragon over here." And then he hears another voice say, hey, I'm not stupid. And also, you should watch how you talk to me before I squash you. And Issei, hearing two voices in his head instead of one, is starting to get more panicked and pulls out his medicine from his backpack and starts to try to swallow some pills. But it was slapped out of his hand with by a school bully. He has been bullied from elementary school all the way upwards by this one person known as Jeremy. And Issei is always tired of this happening. No matter what he does, he still gets bullied by him. Jeremy slaps it out of his hand and says, "Hey, freak, watch where you're going." And he pushes him, and everyone looks at him and thinks that Issei bumped into him, when they didn't see him get pushed. Except for one person who had white hair, but completely ignored it. And a person with red hair who also ignored it. And Issei was very embarrassed because first thing when he gets into a school, everyone's going to remember him as that one guy that bumped into the fucking bully and got fucked up, because that's what's about to happen. Because the bully picks him up by the neck and starts viciously beating on him, punching him in the face as hard as possible, making it to where Issei spits out a tooth and has a few black eyes after he's done, and kicks him in the stomach, making him kneel to the ground and in a fetal position while big booting him and calling his friends over to help. Issei is currently being beaten and he has some fractures in his bones. So he ends up going unconscious and he wakes up in the nurse's office afterwards. The nurse merely looks at him and says, "Hey, I heard you're the freak that got transferred here. I heard that you were supposedly a person that psychotically murdered multiple people in a mental asylum?" The nurse said, and the nurse merely said, "Is that true? If so, I don't think you should really be here. You could do that to our students. We have to ask if you could please leave." The nurse said so, and the principal who's behind the nurse the entire time said the same thing, but they didn't have the power to move him, because his parents were quite influential in this. They're quite rich too. So they can't forcibly kick him out for no reason. And Issei merely says, "Do you think I want to be here? Do you think I want this to happen?" And he looks at his injuries, his bruises, his cuts. They apparently pulled out knives and started cutting him at one point, but they just turned a blind eye, because to them all they see is a murderer. And he merely looks at them and says, "I didn't do it. It was Chucky." And they're like, who's Chucky? And Issei merely says, "Chucky is a doll that's been following me. I don't know where he comes out of. You gotta help me." And he says this in pleading voice. And they're like, "You're insane. Just just go to class. I don't want to listen to any of this crazy nonsense. Let the teachers deal with you. What the principal said. Issei merely got up out of the bed, still bruised and injured. Didn't really get cared for, he just got rest. That's all that happened. They didn't really patch up his wounds. Issei merely started walking outside of the nurse's office and walked towards the classroom. And he heard a familiar voice in his head. The voice of Chucky. And he said, "You thought they would believe you that a walking doll was murdering people? I could literally come out right now and murder both of them, and it seemed like you did it because I could just pop into you again. I'm inside you." And Issei merely thinks in his head, that doesn't sound right. And why is it me? Why? He's in desperation. He's been dealing with depression ever since Chucky appeared. Maids have been dying inside of his household. And they all blame it on Issei, but his parents sweep it under the rug. But everyone knows that Issei's murdered some people, even though it wasn't him. He swears it wasn't him, and it wasn't. It was always Chucky. Like the maid last week. The maid last week was tidying up Issei's room. Issei was asleep, and Chucky appeared out of the sacred gear, out of his hand. And it was in front of the maid, on the front of his bed. The maid looked at the doll and said, "Oh, that's a beautiful doll," and started cleaning it. And as soon as Chucky started getting cleaned, his face started getting cleaned, and the maid took off the cloth, she saw Chucky's facial expression change into anger. And Chucky immediately said, "You dumb bitch, come here!" and grabbed onto her head and started punching her with the little fist. And all the maid did was slap Chucky away. But Chucky, as soon as Chucky was slapped away, all he did was disappear. And the maid was confused until all of a sudden she feels little hands in the back of her head. And she's getting choked by little fingers that are digging into her skin. Chucky is brutally strangling this woman, and she doesn't know how he got on top of her. On the top of her, where the back of her neck is, and how he's up there like he's getting a piggyback ride. And she can hear her bones starting to break in her neck. And then all of a sudden, Chucky says, Hey, I don't think you should snap yet." And then he twists his legs and his hands to the side and snaps the maid's neck. Right in front of Issei's bed, drags the body in the bed right next to Issei, and says, Hey, heard you had wet dreams about this maid. When you wake up, you're going to have a surprise, aren't you? And he just goes back into sacred gear. Then when Issei woke up, and his parents knocked on the door to wake him up, when they opened the door, they saw him sleeping next to the cold, dead corpse of the maid. And this is why everyone started thinking he's a murderer, because wherever he appears, murders happen. But it's always swept under the rug because of his influential parents who are running for minister in their town. And they don't want this on their record. So Issei has been thinking about this while he's going to class. And he's enraged about the whole situation. Why is it him that has to deal with all this? Why can't I just be normal? Why can't I have a normal life? Why can't I get a girlfriend? Why can't I do anything that everyone else can do? And as he gets into the class, he doesn't introduce himself. He merely goes to the back of the room and sits down. And as soon as he sits down, everyone that was near him got up and went to the front. No one was in the back room except for Issei. Not even a person with white hair that was very short that everyone knew, known as Konako. She moved also, because she was quite literally disgusted with the very existence of Issei. Because she heard how he murdered people and said he didn't do it. And how his parents were flopping around money, making all of the problems disappear for him. She didn't like that his life was so easy. But she didn't know that he was suffering. She didn't know anything. She didn't know his struggles or what was happening to him. And Issei merely went to the back of the room, put his head down while everyone moved. And the teacher asked if he could introduce himself. He was shaking because he heard how many murders had been committed by this boy and how many he's gotten away with. And Issei merely says, "I don't need to introduce myself. As you all know, I'm the murderer, the psychotic murderer you all know, Issei Hyodo. Go ahead and clap it up, everybody. Fucking clap it up." And he snaps at everyone. And they all start to sweat beads of sweat. And he says, Oh, wow. So you guys aren't going to clap it up for me? You guys aren't just going to go ahead and viciously beat me down? Huh? There's so many of you. Come on, come on. He starts waving his hand around, just saying, come on. I thought you guys did that in the fucking front of the school. As he looked at the boys that had viciously beaten him down before. And he says, you know, if I was a murderer, I'd murder your asses first. So you're fucking lucky I'm not. As he says this, they have sweat going down their faces, and they do loud, audible gulps. And Issei just sits back down and says, teach, continue your lesson or whatever. I'll go to sleep. He just went to sleep the entire time until the bell rung. Once the bell rung, he got up first. Everyone made a way for him, and he walked to the cafeteria. The actual lunch ladies didn't serve him any food. They merely pretended like he didn't exist. So Issei sat in the back of the cafeteria. As soon as he sat down, no one sat near him. And Issei was in his thoughts thinking of how he can not be the outcast. How can he make friends? And Chucky merely said in his mind, you can start stabbing people. That's the perfect way to make friends. I mean, they're not going to be alive, but hey, you made a friend. And Issei merely says in his head, shut the fuck up, Chucky. And Chucky ends up laughing, saying, you can never shut me up, Issei. Though I can always shut up you, or your bullies, if you need. Actually, not even if you need, if I want. And Issei is merely pissed off that his existence is being written off as a murderer. And as he's in his thoughts, one young woman sits right next to him. She has white eyes and white hair and golden eyes. And she's very short. And she starts staring at Issei while he's thinking. And she asks, hello? How are you exactly today? She says in a nervous voice, because she heard he's a psychotic murderer. And Issei merely looks at her and says, oh, wait, you're talking to me? And she's like, who else will I be talking to? And he points to everyone else in the entire cafeteria and says, nope, 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 nope. That's what Konako says. Nope. And he points to himself and says, wait, you're talking to me? And she's like, yes I am. How are you adjusting? And Issei says, horribly. Everyone thinks I'm a murderer, even though I'm not. But hey, who's going to believe me? And Konako says, well, I believe you. And this makes Issei almost cry. Because no one's believed him. His mother, his father, his previous friends before all this started happening didn't believe him and they left him. And he was brutally beaten up almost every day from his father and mother. And he was always screamed at for being a murderer. And the victim's relatives would always come towards him, beat him viciously, or try to kill him later. So no one would really believe him. The fact that this girl believed him made him cry. He had tears flowing down his face, and he said, "Thank you," very, very loudly. And everyone looked at him. And then he said, "Oh, sorry." And he wiped away his tears, and he said, "So, what's your name?" And she said, "My name's Konako. And I am talking to you because, well, my president of the ORC club wanted to ask if you would join us. Or, well, come over after the end of school." Which, Issei started looking at his options and decided, I might as well. I mean, if I go home, all that's going to happen is I'm going to be beaten by my parents, or they're going to say, "Oh, you did this wrong. You did this wrong. How are you going to be the minister's son if you can't even do these simple tasks?" Which Issei was told to be stupid. He was called the stupid murderer. All over, everywhere. He was known as vicious and very, very stupid. About the grade of a fifth grader is how they... Well, actually, the age of 5 is what they said. His mental age is 5. They said that over and over to where everyone believed it almost. But the real Issei was quite intelligible. He was quite intelligent. And he started talking to Konako while it was lunchtime. Konako started asking questions. Issei answered them, and she asked, "Well, if you didn't actually kill anyone, then who did?" And Issei says, "You're not going to believe me if I told you, so I don't think I should really tell you." And And also, even the doctors didn't believe me. I mean, supernatural don't exist, so mine's improbable to everyone else. And as soon as Konako heard about the supernatural, she was curious, because she didn't really hear about who did it, like who he was blaming it on. They just heard that he was blaming it on someone else, or something else. But it might actually be a supernatural thing. It might be a devil, or an actual angel, or a fallen angel. It could be any of those, and he just got penned for them. So she merely asks, and Issei merely says, well, I might as well tell you. So, before I tell you, do you believe in the supernatural? And as soon as she says this, she starts, like, smiling and laughing a little, because her president always asks this to every newcomer in her club, if they believe in the supernatural. Now she's being asked by some guy she just met. And she says, yes, I believe in the supernatural. And Issei says, well, there's this weird thing that appears out of my hand. Or out of my body specifically, and it's a doll known as Chucky. I don't know how, but it just kills people. Whenever it pops out, someone dies. Or something bad happens. And I don't know how to get rid of it. I've tried many things. I've even tried killing myself before. But it prevents me from doing so. Not even just that, it's some other thing that's preventing me from doing it. I've tried overdosing, but as soon as I try to overdose, I get slapped by the Chucky doll, or it confiscates it. Right before I can even think of doing it. Or it threatens me by using my parents. Even though they hate me, I don't hate them. Yeah, so you're not going to believe me either, I can already tell. So, if you want a normal school life, then please don't talk to me, because I'll probably ruin your school life. As she said this and prepared to get up, she said, I believe you. Which caught Issei off guard, but he was very delighted because he didn't sense a single bit of lies or a single bit of distrust in that, or dishonesty. Ever since he was young, he was able to sense dishonesty in people, if they actually truly believe something or not. It's because whenever someone said they believed him, and they always end up lying afterwards, he'd always be able to tell the signs. And she showed no pupils retraction, she showed no doubts by looking away, and she showed no shaky voice or anything that doesn't show that she has confidence in her answer. And she isn't really showing any signs of disgust or any signs of distrust currently. So Issei chooses to believe her. And he says, alright, I'll go to the ORC, what time? And she says, how about after lunch? And he says, okay. And then as soon as the bell rings, he's like, so do we go now? And she's like, I didn't know it was this time already. She grabs Issei by the wrist and drags him to the ORC, while they start talking about many things. For example, Issei ended up asking, what's your favorite scary movie? And Konako ended up saying, I think that's a reference to something, isn't it? And Issei's like, no, it's just a question. What's your favorite scary movie? And she says, my favorite scary movie is called Blackout. It's where there's a power outage, and there's these zombies that come in and start ripping people apart. I think it's very interesting. And also, the fact that I don't think most people would survive. It's my favorite because it actually scared me when I was younger, is what Konako answers with. And Issei is quite surprised. And actually is enjoying the conversations, because Issei's always liked horror movies and sketches of monsters, which Konako, doesn't really like that topic too well, but is enough to communicate with him perfectly. So as they're having casual conversations and going towards the ORC, as soon as he reaches into the ORC and opens the door, he gets a disgusted look from Kiba, from Rias, Akino, and, Konako just gives a neutral look. They're all looking at him with disgust. And then Rias speaks and says, Issei Hyodo, you are here because you are a dangerous threat, is what we presume, and you seem to have some type of supernatural power. We can feel power oozing off of you, so tell us what you are, or what sacred gear you hold. And Issei says, wait, sacred what? And once Issei says this, All that Ria says is, "Oh, you're acting dumb, aren't you?" Because the energy that's going off of you says your sacred gear is active. And Issei merely says, "Wait, what do you mean by it's active?" And as soon as Issei's thinking about active, he thinks of one thing, Chucky. And he says, "Wait, everyone, you're saying it's active right now, right?" And Ria says, "Oh, yes, your sacred gear is active. Wait, you're not actually aware of that? It's been active the entire school day." And Issei says, "Could a doll be a sacred gear?" And she says, "Yes, I suppose, but it would be quite bizarre." And Issei just says, "Oh, no, 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 no." And he starts saying, "I gotta go find it, I gotta go find it." He's about to rush out of the room before Kiba quickly grabs his arm and says, "Find what?" And Issei looks back in a horrified face and says, "Chucky." And that's where I'm going to end it here. I hope you all enjoyed What If Issei Had Chucky as a Sacred Gear, Part 1.